A humble girl paid for a stranger's taxi when he had no wallet. She had no idea he was a millionaire CEO in disguise. Days later, he returned, and what he did moved everyone. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Rachel White had never thought of herself as someone who drew attention in a crowd. At 37, with short brown hair brushed neatly above her shoulders and warm brown eyes revealing both kindness and a shy reserve, she blended easily into the gentle rhythms of Oak Hill, a mid-sized American town known for its welcoming porches, tidy front yards, and tree-lined streets. She worked as an assistant at Little Page Books on Elm Street, where people came as much for the friendly smiles as they did for their favorite novels. On that brisk October afternoon, Rachel had just finished a grocery errand, the autumn chill stinging her cheeks like a reminder that winter would be on its way soon. The swirl of leaves at her feet gave her a small thrill of nostalgia. Everything around her was changing color and temperature, and yet her life remained oddly static. She had begun to yearn, in the quiet corners of her heart, for something beyond the routine of sorting books and assisting the occasional customer in search of a hidden gem. Still, she told herself these were fleeting thoughts, too nebulous to chase when she had bills to pay and tasks to manage. Just as she stepped onto the sidewalk near the bookstore, Rachel noticed a commotion. A classic yellow taxi sat by the curb, its brake lights illuminating the early twilight. A tall man in casual jeans and a slightly rumpled jacket stood next to the open passenger door, his voice tight with embarrassment. From the other side of the window, the driver's agitated tone grew louder. Onlookers slowed, but kept their distance, uncertain if they should intervene. "I'm telling you," the cab driver barked, "it's $23.50, and I can't just let it go." The passenger, who Rachel would soon know as Evan Matthews, ran a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "I had my wallet earlier," he muttered in disbelief, flipping through its empty compartments. "I must have left my cash behind. I'm sorry, really." The driver, wearing a tired expression, huffed and glanced at the small crowd. "Somebody's got to pay," he said, his patience thinning. Rachel's heart panged at the sight of Evan standing there, clearly mortified by the situation. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, feeling an inexplicable need to help. "Excuse me," she said softly, looking at the driver. "How much does he owe you?" $23.50, the driver repeated, squinting as though challenging her to put up the money. Without further thought, Rachel pulled out her worn wallet and counted the bills. She extended them toward the driver. "Here, that should cover it." A flicker of relief crossed Evan's face. He turned to Rachel, eyes filled with gratitude and no small measure of embarrassment. "I can't let you do that," he insisted, fumbling for any form of identification. "Please, let me pay you back." "If you give me your information," Rachel shook her head, pressing the money into the driver's calloused hand. "Don't worry about it," she replied with a gentle smile. "I'm sure you'd do the same for me or someone else. Just pay it forward one day." The driver, grumbling but satisfied to finally have his fare, handed Evan his receipt and drove off into the murky glow of approaching dusk. In the sudden quiet, Evan turned back to Rachel, shoulders still tense from the confrontation. "I at least owe you my gratitude," he said, voice softening. He attempted to offer her a small rectangular card. "Please, take this. I'd feel better if you'd let me make it right somehow." She gave a tiny, self-conscious laugh, shaking her head again. "It's really all right," she said, glancing at the narrow storefront of the bookstore. "I was just doing what anyone should do. You take care." Before he could protest further, she clutched her grocery bag and stepped away. Her heart thumped oddly in her chest, a sensation of both nervousness and something else, something strangely hopeful. From behind the glass door of Little Page Books, Rachel could see Evan still standing on the sidewalk. His gaze lingered on her with open curiosity, as though he couldn't quite fathom the kindness she'd just shown. The moment felt charged, a small spark in the gathering dusk. Yet she had no inkling that this brief exchange, this impulsive act of generosity, would alter both their lives in the most unexpected ways. Rachel didn't sleep well that night. She kept replaying the scene with the taxi driver in her mind, Evan's embarrassed smile, his hands patting empty pockets, the relief on his face when she stepped in. It baffled her how a small gesture could stir such confusion in her heart. At Little Page Books the next morning, she arrived before sunrise, feeling the chill of the crisp air cling to her coat as she let herself in with a jingle of keys. Inside, the wooden floors creaked under her steps. The place smelled of old paper and the faint aroma of yesterday's coffee. Usually, this cozy routine soothed her. She loved organizing the shelves, reading blurbs, discovering new titles. Yet today, her thoughts kept drifting. She shook her head, determined to focus on what needed to be done, but everything reminded her of that moment on the sidewalk. The swirl of leaves, the worried look in Evan's eyes. "It's just a favor," she told herself under her breath. "Why is it haunting me like this?" She tried to brush aside the thought. After all, maybe she'd never see that man again. A few hours later, when Sarah Jones, the 52-year-old owner of the bookstore, stepped in, Rachel was halfway through rearranging a display of autumn-themed novels. Sarah had a comforting presence, tall and broad-shouldered, with a warm smile and hair that had turned a dignified silver. "You're in early," she observed, setting her purse down on the counter. "Everything all right, dear?" Rachel forced a smile and nodded. "Just wanted to get a head start. I had some things on my mind." She busied herself straightening a few stray paperbacks, hoping to hide her restless energy. Before Sarah could press for details, a younger co-worker named Tara, barely in her mid-20s, all enthusiasm and wide grins, bounced into the store. "Morning, y'all," she chirped, setting her iced latte on the counter. "Hey, Rach, I heard something about you paying for a taxi ride yesterday. Mr. Goldberg from next door was telling customers he saw you play Good Samaritan." Sarah raised an eyebrow with a curious smile. "Is that what's on your mind?" she teased. "Sounds like a sweet thing to do. Must have been quite the scene." Rachel felt her cheeks flush. "It wasn't a big deal," she said softly, looking down at the books she was stacking. "He was just stuck, and I had a few extra dollars." She didn't mention Evan's striking eyes or the quiet sincerity in his voice. Part of her wanted to keep that detail to herself, as though it were a secret not yet ready to be shared. Sarah nodded approvingly. This town could use a little more kindness, especially these days. Everybody's so busy looking out for themselves. "I think it's great you helped." Despite her casual shrug, Rachel felt a flutter in her stomach, an odd mix of pride and embarrassment. Tara smiled brightly, adding, "Maybe the guy will come by and say thanks. Maybe he'll bring flowers or, I don't know, a big box of chocolates." Rolling her eyes good-naturedly, Rachel resumed her work, trying to concentrate on the dull tasks at hand. Yet each time the bell above the door chimed, her heart gave a tiny leap. She found herself glancing up, half hoping it would be him. Late in the afternoon, when only a couple of regular customers roamed the aisles, Sarah casually mentioned, "Oh, before I forget, someone came by asking for you earlier. Tall fellow, dark hair, kind of dressed down but polite. I told him you were off until this morning. He didn't leave a name, just said he'd try again." Rachel's hand froze in midair. A hardcover volume of classic poetry clutched to her chest. Did he say what he wanted?" Her voice sounded too eager, and she tried to rein it in. Sarah shrugged. "Nope. Just asked if you worked here." She paused, noting Rachel's reaction. "Is everything okay?" Rachel forced her shoulders down, realizing they'd tensed up. "Yeah," she managed, swallowing the sudden lump in her throat. "I'm fine. Thanks, Sarah." Yet inside, her thoughts spun in frantic circles. Could it be him? Did Evan really come back looking for her? Unable to ignore the flutter in her chest, she turned back to the display, placing the poetry book in its proper spot. The store felt strangely charged, as though something important had happened without her. And in the quiet of that late afternoon, Rachel's mind drifted to the face of a man she'd only briefly met, her heart humming with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. That evening, Rachel walked the few blocks to her small apartment, with her thoughts tumbling one over the other. Even as she tried to settle into her usual routine, making a simple dinner of leftover chicken soup and toast, then sorting laundry, her mind refused to stay put. She couldn't stop wondering why this mysterious stranger would have come looking for her. Once her chores were finished, she settled on the worn sofa in her living room. The television was on at low volume, but she paid little attention to the rerun of an old sitcom flickering across the screen. Instead, she found herself running through 1,000 questions. Was Evan simply determined to pay her back? Or was there something else behind his eagerness to find her? Maybe he felt humiliated and wanted to prove he wasn't some scam artist. Then again, maybe it was just courtesy, an ordinary gesture of returning a favor. She sighed, rubbing her temples. There was no way to know, and she didn't like how her imagination insisted on chasing possibilities she had no evidence for. The last time she'd let herself get carried away with what-ifs, she'd ended up deeply disappointed. That had been years ago, with a man who promised her the world only to disappear the moment the relationship required genuine commitment. She still felt a slight pang when she thought of it. Since then, she had taught herself to expect less, to keep her dreams modest and her hopes measured. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen displayed a familiar name, Martha, her friend of nearly 2 decades who now lived in another state. They didn't talk often, but Martha always seemed to sense when Rachel had something on her mind. "Hey, stranger," Martha said as soon as Rachel answered. Her voice carried its usual warm note of optimism. "Thought I'd check in. How's life in Oak Hill? Found any hidden treasures in that bookstore of yours?" Rachel smiled faintly. Same old, same old. I'm good, though. Just a little preoccupied, I guess." Martha laughed gently. "You sound like you have something on your mind. Spill." It took a few moments for Rachel to describe what happened with the taxi situation, Evan's predicament, her stepping in, the strangely persistent feeling it had left behind. Martha listened intently. "And you say he came looking for you?" she asked, intrigued. "Sarah said a tall man asked for me," Rachel replied. "I assume it's him. I don't see why anyone else would bother." There was a brief pause before Martha spoke again. "Rach, maybe this is a sign to shake things up. You always say you want more in life, but you never step out of your comfort zone." Rachel bristled, not quite ready to accept that possibility. "I'm not sure," she muttered. "It's just one weird incident. I'm probably making it bigger in my head." "You have a tendency to close doors before they even open," Martha said gently. "I get it. You've been hurt before. But don't you deserve a chance at something new?" Silence lingered until Rachel mustered a non-committal, "I'll think about it." As they ended the call, she couldn't shake the feeling that her friend's words rang true. She was afraid, plain and simple, afraid of hoping for a change that might never come, afraid of confronting a possibility she couldn't control. Setting her phone aside, Rachel stared out the window at the glowing street lamp illuminating the empty sidewalk below. She recalled how she used to dream of traveling or trying new things, writing stories, learning how to speak Italian, maybe even opening a small cafe corner in the bookstore. Over time, life's practicalities had eroded those dreams. Now she was comfortable, which sometimes felt like a double-edged sword. Her gaze drifted to the small table in the corner. On it stood a photo of her younger self, beaming on a trip to the Grand Canyon a decade ago. That woman had seemed so fearless, so ready to embrace life. With a long sigh, Rachel realized she missed that version of herself. It was easier to remain cautious, to expect nothing grand. But a quiet voice at the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something more. By the time she headed to bed, she was exhausted from overthinking. As she switched off the lamp, her final thought hovered on Evan, who he was, why he cared, and whether letting a glimmer of hope in might be worth the risk. Early the next morning, Rachel arrived at Little Page Books to find Sarah hunched over a stack of paperwork at the front counter. The older woman looked up as soon as she heard the door chime. Her usual warm smile was replaced by a taut expression. "Morning, Rachel," Sarah greeted, sliding a sheaf of documents aside. "I'm glad you're here. I need to talk with you." Concern laced Rachel's voice. "What's wrong?" She set down her travel mug of coffee, noticing how Sarah's fingers tapped restlessly against the counter's edge. Sarah exhaled, removing her reading glasses. "It's the store," she said quietly. "Our sales have been dipping for a while, and the numbers this month don't look good. Rent's increasing next spring. Competition from online retailers is hitting us harder than I expected." Rachel's heart sank. She glanced around the beloved bookstore, shelves lined with carefully chosen titles and little reading nooks that felt almost magical. "Is there anything we can do?" she asked. Sarah managed a half-hearted smile. "I'm open to suggestions. Maybe we could host more events, reading clubs, signings, anything to bring people in. I love this place, but I can't keep it afloat on love alone." Before Rachel could respond, Tara bustled in, breathless. "We have 2 boxes of new releases to stock," she announced, barely noticing Sarah's troubled mood. Rachel gave Tara a quick nod, deciding she would fill her in later. Right now, she wanted to reassure Sarah. "I'll think of some ideas," Rachel promised. "We can brainstorm and see what might bring more foot traffic." Sarah touched Rachel's arm gently. "Thank you," she murmured. "I appreciate that." Throughout the morning, Rachel tried to focus on helping customers and neatly shelving the newly arrived paperbacks. Still, worry gnawed at the back of her mind. The bookstore was more than a job. It felt like a second home, a place where she found meaning. She couldn't imagine losing it. She refused to let that happen without putting up a fight. Amid these concerns, another thought kept surfacing: Evan. She recalled how confidently he'd offered to repay her, insisting that he owed her something. Was he a businessman? He certainly seemed articulate enough. Could he help with ideas for the store's financial slump? Then Rachel immediately shook off the notion she barely knew him, and the store was Sarah's livelihood. It felt presumptuous to hope some stranger would swoop in and solve their problems. Nevertheless, the niggling possibility clung to her. While she took inventory in the storeroom, she paused to reread a small note pinned to the corkboard, where staff sometimes left encouraging messages. In neat handwriting, it read, "Books are dreams brought to life. Let's share them with everyone." Sarah had written it when she first opened the store. Rachel remembered how that line had inspired her from day one. Trying to refocus, she carried a box of books back to the front. On her way, she overheard Tara chatting animatedly with a customer about a local poetry reading. That sparked a thought: events. Sarah had mentioned it earlier, maybe an evening event with local poets, or even a monthly discussion group. People often came for the sense of community as much as for the books themselves. It was an idea. But how could they market it effectively? Around midday, Sarah poked her head into the section where Rachel was working. "Any breakthroughs? Genius?" she asked lightly, though her voice held an undercurrent of anxiety. Rachel offered a tentative smile. "A few ideas. We can talk later this afternoon." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Whenever you're ready." And Rachel, "Thanks for caring." As the hours ticked by, Rachel made notes, coffee tastings, local writer meet and greets, maybe a small weekend fair inside the bookstore. Yet all these things took resources: advertising, refreshments, sometimes speaker fees, money they didn't have. Shortly before closing, Tara approached with a questioning look. "We had a man here earlier," she said. "He asked for you specifically. I told him you were in the back, but he said he'd come back another time. He seemed in a hurry." Rachel's pulse quickened. "Did you get a name?" Tara shook her head. "No, but he looked kind of anxious. Tall, dark hair, and definitely seemed determined to find you." She gave Rachel a teasing smile. "You have a secret admirer?" Rachel fought the urge to race outside in search of him. "Probably just someone needing help with a special order," she mumbled, hoping she sounded more casual than she felt. But as she turned off the store lights at the end of the day, she felt the tension of two worlds colliding, the quiet panic of trying to save the bookstore, and the restless wondering about the man who seemed intent on crossing her path again. Dark clouds hung low over Oak Hill the next morning, hinting at a drizzle that could turn into a steady rain. Rachel woke early, determined to finalize some proposals for Sarah. She made a fresh pot of coffee in her apartment's tiny kitchen, settling at the small wooden table with a pen and a yellow notepad. Outside, cars hissed by on wet pavement. Inside, she mulled over the events idea, scribbling down potential themes, local author highlights, poetry nights, children's storytelling afternoons. Yet despite her progress, the nagging thought of Evan resurfaced, accompanied by a flutter in her chest she couldn't deny. Something in her urged that the two problems, her uncertainty about him and the bookstore's precarious situation, were oddly intertwined, though she couldn't quite explain why. With a sigh, she tucked those musings away and forced herself to focus on tasks at hand. By mid-morning, she arrived at Little Page Books, beating Sarah by a good half hour. The store felt peaceful in its closed state, lights dimmed and shelves waiting for another day's bustle. She switched on the overhead lamps, illuminating the wooden floors and the newly arranged displays. She hoped the store's warm glow would soon be matched by a renewed sense of optimism for everyone involved. As she was reviewing the notes, the bells above the entrance gave a gentle jingle. Rachel looked up, expecting Sarah or Tara. Instead, there he was, Evan, framed by the doorway, water droplets glistening on the shoulders of his casual jacket. He took a hesitant step inside, exhaling as though relieved to have finally caught her alone. "Hi," he said, sounding a little breathless. "I hope this is okay. I didn't mean to barge in before opening." He offered a sheepish smile, obviously aware that the store wasn't officially open yet. Rachel's heart thumped, but she found her voice. "It's fine," she said, trying not to sound as startled as she felt. "I'm usually here early." She cleared her throat, setting down her notepad. "So, you've been looking for me?" He nodded, glancing around the shelves. "I wanted to say thank you properly, and to return the favor, at least repay you for the taxi fare." She noticed he wasn't carrying any envelopes or cards. Apparently, he intended a more personal gesture. "It bothered me, the way I left it." "You were kind, and I don't want you to think I took that lightly." Rachel paused, struggling with her own mixed emotions. She offered a gentle shrug. "I never expected you to repay me. It was just something I felt I should do in the moment." For a second, neither spoke. Rain pattered softly against the windows, and the store's silence pressed around them. Finally, Evan broke it. "Well, maybe I can help you in another way." He glanced at her notepad. "Are you working on something important?" She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Yeah, our bookstore is struggling. We need to draw people in, or we might not stay afloat. I'm trying to come up with event ideas, but resources are limited, and I'm not sure where to start." To her surprise, Evan's expression sparked with genuine interest. He pulled out a chair from a reading table nearby and sat. "Event planning? Marketing? I might have some thoughts. My line of work, well, let's just say I've picked up a few tips on how to get attention for good causes and businesses." Rachel blinked. She had guessed he might be business savvy, but the confidence in his tone caught her off guard. She found herself strangely relieved, as though some part of her had hoped this conversation would unfold precisely like this. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maybe I can share ideas and you can see if they fit. No strings attached, I promise." She fiddled with her pen, uncertain but intrigued. "I can't really pay a consultant right now," she said with a soft laugh that carried a hint of apology. Evan waved a hand. "Don't be ridiculous. Think of it as me paying off my taxi debt." His eyes caught hers, sincerity shining in them. "I like to help when I can." Something in her chest loosened at those words. Maybe it was the fact that, for once, she wasn't the only one offering help. Maybe it was the comfort of sharing her worries with someone who actually had a plan to fix them. Either way, in that quiet morning hush, Rachel felt a cautious but definite shift inside herself, an openness to possibilities she hadn't allowed in a long time. "All right," she finally said, a tiny smile forming. "I'll let you help." Evan flashed a relieved grin. "Great. Let's start with what you're working on." As she scooted her chair closer, the soft glow of the bookstore lights reflected on the damp windows outside, hinting at fresh starts and new alliances. And though a part of her still shivered with lingering fears, she sensed that in choosing to accept his offer, she was taking one small, brave step toward a future she never thought she'd dare to embrace. For the next few days, the late autumn wind rustled through Oak Hill, bringing cooler nights and the promise of an even chillier season ahead. Inside little page books, however, a newfound excitement warmed the atmosphere. Rachel and Evan found themselves meeting frequently in the store's small reading corner, heads bent over a notebook filled with marketing ideas and brainstorming sessions. He never called himself an expert, but the clarity of his advice suggested he was no ordinary passerby. "You could consider inviting a local musician on weekends," Evan suggested one afternoon. "Live music might draw people who wouldn't normally stop by. Once they come for the music, they'll see all the wonderful books and, hopefully, become regulars." He spoke in a calm, assured tone that gave Rachel a sense of direction she hadn't felt in a long while. Sarah, observing from behind the front counter, took note of Evan's easy confidence. She found it refreshing that he seemed genuinely interested in helping. As the 52-year-old bookstore owner, with short, silver hair and a nurturing demeanor, she was used to carrying the shop's burdens on her own. Now, she watched curiously as Rachel, once hesitant about seeking advice, showed real enthusiasm for these new ideas. One afternoon, Sarah discreetly pulled Rachel aside. "I like him," she said, not bothering to hide a small, knowing smile. "He might be the breath of fresh air we need around here." Rachel felt a twinge of color rise to her cheeks. "He's got good suggestions," she admitted, trying to keep her tone neutral. "But, Sarah, he doesn't really talk about himself. I don't even know what he does for a living. Sometimes it feels like he's leaving out details." Sarah patted Rachel's hand gently. "Everyone's got their secrets," she said, "but from what I see, he's been a genuine help. Maybe you can ask him more directly if it's bothering you." That night, after closing the store, Rachel lingered in the cozy corner with Evan. Most of the lights had been turned off, except for a few warm lamps illuminating the tall wooden shelves. Stacks of newly delivered books surrounded them, and the faint aroma of coffee drifted through the air. Evan flipped through a small notebook, scribbling a final note before handing it to her. "Here," he said softly, "this is a rough outline for a small holiday-themed event, something to bring in local families. I added cost estimates, too." Rachel, impressed, scanned his meticulous handwriting. "You really put thought into this," she murmured. "Thank you." He leaned back in the old armchair, crossing his long legs at the ankles. "You're giving me way too much credit. I enjoy this sort of thing. Besides, you're the one who's going to run it. I'm just sharing ideas." For a moment, Rachel debated whether to press him about his background, where he learned all this. But looking at his kind expression, her courage faltered. Their newfound camaraderie felt too delicate, and she feared chasing him away with intrusive questions. Instead, she chose to focus on the comfort of his presence. In a time when the bookstore's future felt precarious, having someone with such clear, strategic thinking was a gift she didn't want to lose. Evan stood, sliding his hands into the pockets of his jacket. "If you give me a list of potential sponsors, I can see who might be willing to donate snacks or raffle items for the event," he offered. "Sometimes local businesses are happy to support something that helps the community." Rachel nodded eagerly. "Yes, definitely. We can talk to Mike at the coffee shop down the street. He's always friendly, and he might want in." A fleeting smile crossed Evan's face. "Perfect. Let's do it." He checked his watch and exhaled. "It's getting late. I should let you close up." With the overhead lights now dimmed, the bookstore felt enveloped in a peaceful hush. Rachel escorted Evan to the door. "Thanks again," she said softly, holding the door open. A cool breeze swept in, sending a slight shiver through her. "I really appreciate what you're doing." He paused on the threshold, giving her a searching look. "Rachel, it's honestly my pleasure, and if there's ever anything else you want to ask me, I'm here." For a second, their eyes met in a way that made her heart flutter, but she found herself unable to speak. Then he nodded goodnight and disappeared into the crisp darkness. Standing alone, Rachel realized how significant his presence had become in such a short time. A wave of both curiosity and gratitude washed over her. She locked the door, her thoughts dwelling on how a man she barely knew had stepped in like a mentor she never thought she needed, one who might guide her if she'd only let him. Over the next week, Rachel and Sarah pored over Evan's notes, scheduling brainstorming meetings at the bookstore before opening hours. With each new idea, Rachel felt her heart flutter between excitement and nervousness, hosting large events, music nights, collaborations with other local shops. All of it was far beyond her usual comfort zone. Tara, curious and quick-witted, couldn't help but notice the shift. "You're more alive these days," she told Rachel one morning while shelving travel guides. "I mean, you've always cared about the store, but now you're practically glowing with all these plans." Rachel tried not to grin too broadly. "I just think it's time we do something different," she replied, partly deflecting attention. It was true. Though fear still lingered, she felt a glimmer of hope that success might be within reach if she dared to act boldly. Late one afternoon, Evan stopped by with a friendly wave. He carried a folded newspaper under his arm, looking right at home among the towering shelves. "Heard from anyone about sponsoring your upcoming event?" he asked, brushing a light drizzle off his jacket. Rachel nodded. "Yes. Mike's coffee shop is on board to provide pastries at a discount, and a local florist agreed to donate small bouquets for table decorations. It's a start." He gave an approving grin. "That's great progress. And how are you feeling about stepping into more of a leadership role?" She glanced away, fiddling with a pen in her hand. honestly, a bit intimidated. I'm used to working quietly in the background. It's safer there." Evan stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Safety doesn't often lead to growth. You have good instincts, Rachel. The more you trust them, the more this store will benefit. I promise." It struck her how effortlessly he encouraged her, like a person well accustomed to pushing others toward success. The mentor dynamic felt empowering, yet a small part of her remained cautious. She forced a light laugh to ease the tension. "You sound like a motivational poster," he shrugged. "Maybe I've read too many." Then, remembering something, he held up the folded newspaper. "By the way, I saw this feature on local events. The paper often spotlights interesting community gatherings. Might be worth a call to see if they'd cover yours." Rachel's eyes widened. Publicity in the newspaper, that would be huge. Yet, as soon as the excitement sparked, a note of anxiety trailed behind. "But we've never done anything that big before." He met her gaze warmly. "That doesn't mean you can't now." Just then, Sarah stepped over, wearing a proud smile of her own. "The poets group you invited confirmed for next weekend's reading night," she said. "They're excited to perform in a more intimate setting. If it goes well, we can host them monthly." "That's wonderful," Rachel exclaimed, feeling a surge of confidence. "I'll handle the flyers and social media posts tonight." Then, Sarah nodded and briefly turned her attention to Evan. "It seems you've been a very good influence, young man." Her eyes sparkled with gratitude, despite the lines of worry that still creased her forehead. "Rachel's found a spark I hadn't seen in a while." Evan looked genuinely pleased. "She's the one doing the work," he said simply. "I'm just happy to support it." As evening approached, Rachel faced a new challenge, stepping outside the bookstore to visit neighboring businesses. She was determined to invite them personally to the event. In the past, she would have felt too shy to walk in unannounced, pitch an idea, and ask for support. But armed with the new conviction spurred by Evan's mentorship and Sarah's faith, she found herself venturing into gift shops, cafes, and even a small art gallery down the block. "You're hosting a poetry reading. Sounds interesting," said a gallery owner, glancing at the flyer Rachel handed her. "Maybe we can collaborate on a future art and poetry night. Let's exchange contacts." By the time she returned to Little Page Books, dusk had settled over Oak Hill. Rachel's cheeks were flushed, and her heart thumped with the thrill of having pushed beyond her usual boundaries. She felt drained, yet oddly exhilarated. It was a small step, just a handful of visits to local shops, but it signaled a willingness to embrace risk. After locking up, Rachel stood outside on the curb, watching the sky fade to a gentle purple. She thought of how she used to dread stepping out of her comfort zone. Now, though fear still tugged at the edges of her thoughts, she also felt an unmistakable sense of possibility, and with Evan's steady presence and Sarah's open-minded support, she was daring to believe there might be no limit to what she could accomplish. The Saturday morning sunshine spilled through the front windows of Little Page Books, casting warm squares of light on the floor. Rachel was at the main counter, meticulously updating the shop's event calendar on her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she hesitated about a possible date for a children's storytelling session. It felt bold to schedule so many events back-to-back, but every piece of advice Evan gave seemed to push them toward a more dynamic approach. Over the past few days, she'd begun reaching out to local poets, artists, and even a small band for a future open mic night. Initially, she felt anxious contacting strangers, explaining who she was and what she hoped to do. But in conversation after conversation, she found a surprising number of enthusiastic people eager to showcase their talents in a cozy bookstore setting. A part of her marveled at how welcoming this new world of planning and promotion could be. Midway through updating the website, Sarah joined her at the counter, glancing at the plans. "You think we can handle all this?" Sarah asked, her tone laced with mild concern. "We're essentially opening ourselves up to a new style of business, live events, catering, marketing, the works." Rachel nodded, though a flicker of self-doubt passed through her. "I think so, if we take it one step at a time. We can start with the poetry reading, gauge how it goes, then slowly incorporate new ideas." She paused, then added softly, "Evans helped me see that playing it safe all the time might be what's held the store back. Maybe this is the leap we need." Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Then I'm behind you every step of the way." Her supportive smile illuminated the fine lines around her eyes. "Let's go for it." By afternoon, the bookstore buzzed with weekend shoppers. A few customers browsed the historical section, while others sipped coffee in the reading nook. Amid the gentle hum of chatter, Rachel spotted Evan slipping quietly inside, scanning the room until his gaze settled on her. She raised a hand in greeting. He approached the counter with a friendly nod. "Busy day, I see." Rachel smiled. "Weekends usually are, but we're hoping all this planning will make them even busier in the coming weeks." Evan set down a handful of brochures on the counter. "I stopped by the community center earlier," he explained. "They were printing out event flyers for local happenings, so I asked if they'd include yours. They gave me these to drop off here, maybe put them by the entrance." Impressed, Rachel picked one up, admiring the professional layout. "Wow, these look great. I appreciate you doing that." He shrugged. "Hey, if it helps, I'm glad." Then his gaze flickered around the store. "I see you're getting a lot more foot traffic today." "Yeah," she nodded. "Small steps in the right direction." Suddenly, Tara appeared, grinning ear to ear. "Rachel, Mike from the coffee shop is on the phone. He wants to confirm his pastry order for the poetry reading." She giggled, noticing Evan. "Oh, hey again. I'm convinced you're some kind of business guru. You're here more than some of our regulars." Evan returned the smile good-naturedly. "I just happen to enjoy bookstores," he said, avoiding elaboration. Tara didn't press further, but her eyes sparkled with obvious curiosity. Rachel stepped aside to take Mike's call, leaving Sarah and Evan standing together. Sarah eyed Evan with thoughtful warmth. "I don't want to overstep," she began, "but I'm grateful for what you're doing for Rachel and this store. Times have been tough, and she's gaining confidence through your input." Evan looked modestly at the floor, his voice soft. "Rachel is special. She's got a lot of heart, and this place, well, it's more than just a business. It's a kind of home for people who love books. I can see how much it matters to her, so I want to see it succeed." Sarah nodded, expression turning contemplative. "You speak like someone who's used to guiding people, maybe even leading them. That takes practice." He offered a tight smile. "I've had some experience, let's say, nothing formal, just life's taught me some lessons." Though she wanted to learn more, Sarah chose to respect his privacy. After all, she could see the earnestness in his eyes whenever he spoke of helping Rachel. "Well," she said gently, "you're a good friend. Rachel deserves that." When Rachel rejoined them, she hung up the phone with an enthusiastic grin. "Mike confirmed the pastries. Everything's set for next weekend. I'm so excited, I can barely stand it." Evan's smile lit up his features. "That's what I like to hear." He started to say something else, then stopped himself, as though weighing how much more he should reveal. Instead, he cleared his throat and checked his watch. "I need to run, but I'll be back soon. Keep me posted on any updates." As he left, Rachel felt a buoyant sense of accomplishment. Not only had they secured more event plans, But she also realized she was stepping into a domain that once intimidated her, forging partnerships and making the bookstore a lively community hub. A ripple of pride coursed through her. For the first time in a long while, she dared to envision a future where little page books might thrive, and maybe, in some quiet corner of that future, her own heart might find a reason to thrive, too. As the next weekend drew closer, the challenges piled up. Rachel found herself juggling phone calls with potential performers and graphic designers who could polish up the event flyers. In her free moments, she updated social media posts, hoping to reach locals who might be unaware of the bookstore's plans. Each passing hour brought a mix of excitement and worry. Would anyone actually show up for these events? One afternoon, Rachel took a brief break, sipping water near the front window. Outside, families strolled by, some with strollers, others with dogs on leashes. She noticed more people pausing to glance at the new posters advertising an upcoming local poets' night. That small reaction made her heart skip with cautious hope. She turned to see Evan entering, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets. "Busy?" he asked, scanning the store for a free seat. "Always," she exhaled, a laugh hinting at her exhaustion. "But in a good way. It's hectic trying to coordinate all these moving parts." He nodded, leaning against the wall near her. "How about the budget? Are you staying on track?" In the days they'd spent brainstorming, he often circled back to finances, suggesting cost-saving options or creative solutions to limit expenses. Rachel pursed her lips. "Mostly, but there's always an unexpected fee here or a last-minute purchase there. The store's already stretched thin, so we're walking a tightrope. We're hoping ticket sales or donations during these events will at least break even." With genuine concern, he nodded. "Need an extra hand? I might help source cheaper printing or find sponsors who'd cover refreshments. It can lighten your load." In truth, Rachel was tempted, but she also felt a stubborn pride that prevented her from leaning on him too much. "Thanks," she said. "I'll definitely keep you posted. Right now, I think we're okay." Though she appreciated his offer, a small voice inside her worried that depending on him too heavily could leave her vulnerable, emotionally and financially. She still wasn't sure how far she could trust someone so mysterious. That evening, after locking up, Sarah invited Rachel to join her for a quick meal at a nearby diner. Settled into a cozy booth with steaming bowls of clam chowder in front of them, they discussed the store's progress. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said, dipping a slice of bread into her soup. "You're taking charge in ways I haven't seen before." "Thank you," Rachel replied, her cheeks flushing under the warm overhead lights. "I just hope it all pays off." Sarah hesitated, then broached a subject that had been on her mind. "What about Evan? He clearly knows a lot about organizing and marketing, but I don't recall him mentioning any local ties. Is he from Oak Hill?" Rachel looked down at her spoon. "He hasn't said much. When I try to steer the conversation that way, he changes the topic. And I'm torn. He's been so wonderful, but it does bother me that I know so little." The older woman reached across the table, giving Rachel's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Sometimes people have their reasons for privacy. He doesn't strike me as deceitful, just guarded. Maybe you just need time." Rachel nodded, letting out a quiet sigh. She found herself wanting to trust Evan despite her past experiences. But the lingering doubt insisted she be cautious. "You're probably right. We'll see how it goes." Back at her apartment, Rachel curled up on the sofa, scanning through the bookstore's social media page. More people had liked and shared the upcoming event announcement than she expected. She felt a glimmer of excitement at the growing interest. Glancing at the clock, she realized how late it was, yet her mind buzzed too loudly for sleep. What if the turnout was disappointing? What if their new approach didn't yield the results they needed? Still, beneath the anxiety, she sensed a current of optimism. For the first time, they weren't just talking about surviving, they were actively working to thrive. Sure, there were endless details to manage, hidden costs, and the nerves of stepping into the unknown. But the bookstore no longer felt like a stagnant relic in a world of online shopping. With Evan's unspoken guidance, Sarah's unwavering support, and her own newfound courage, Rachel was beginning to see difficulties as opportunities to grow. Late the following afternoon, the store prepared to close early for a planning session with a handful of local poets and volunteers. Rachel had set up a long table in the center of the main floor, pushing aside display shelves so they could sit comfortably. A spread of cookies and coffee from Mike's shop was arranged on a small side table, welcoming participants. One by one, the poets arrived, some older, some younger, each with their own style. Rachel greeted them warmly, offering cups of coffee while they introduced themselves. Tara bustled around, checking if anyone needed more sugar or cream, excited by the flurry of creative energy. Sarah floated through the room with a proud smile, glad to see the bookstore buzzing even after hours. Evan slipped in quietly toward the end, a notebook under his arm, and a kind smile that eased any nervousness in the group. Rachel's eyes brightened when she saw him. Over the past few days, she had grown more accustomed to his presence, and she no longer flinched whenever he suggested a new idea or solution. In fact, a sense of ease and partnership had formed, like an unspoken understanding that they were working toward the same goal. "Okay," Rachel began, taking a seat at the head of the table. She felt a slight tremor of nerves at being the leader here. "Thank you all for coming. We're excited to host our first Poets' Night on Friday. We want to discuss the format, timing, and any special requests you might have." A slender woman in her 40s, wearing a colorful scarf, raised her hand. "Will there be time for an open mic portion? Some of my friends mentioned they'd love to share a short piece if there's an opportunity." Rachel nodded. "Absolutely. We can dedicate the last 20 minutes to open mic, so people who aren't on the main list can step up." Another poet, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "What about seating? Sometimes poetry audiences like to stand and mingle, others prefer to sit. Should we plan on chairs for everyone?" Glancing at Evan for a moment, Rachel recalled one of his earlier suggestions. "We'll provide enough chairs in the reading area, but people can also stand if they prefer," she answered. "We'll set up a small stage near the back with a microphone so readers can be heard easily." The conversation flowed, covering topics from lighting to whether they should charge a small admission fee. Rachel found her initial nerves fading as she watched the group's camaraderie grow. In the span of an hour, they mapped out a plan that felt both structured and welcoming. When the meeting ended, the poets chatted among themselves, finishing the last of the cookies. Tara and Sarah began tidying up. Evan, who had mostly observed quietly, stepped over to Rachel. "You handled that like a pro," he remarked, genuinely impressed. She gave a modest shrug. "I'm relieved it went smoothly." "Everyone's so passionate it helps." He nodded, then his tone turned contemplative. "Passion can fuel a community in ways money can't. It's one of the reasons local businesses like this are so valuable. People gather here, share ideas, form connections." His words resonated with her. Growing up, Rachel had often dreamed of building or belonging to something meaningful. She'd lost some of that drive over the years, settling for a quiet life. Now, she felt that old longing stir to life again. This bookstore could become a hub of creativity and warmth for their town, if only they dared to believe in it. Just then, Mike from the coffee shop arrived, carrying a few extra pastries in case anyone was still hungry. Couldn't let the evening end without dropping these by, he joked, setting them on the side table. He and Evan struck up an easy banter about local commerce, discussing ways to cross-promote between the bookstore and the coffee shop. Rachel listened, amused at how easily Evan navigated these conversations. As the evening wrapped up, a sense of unity seemed to fill the store. Writers, volunteers, and business owners had come together for a shared purpose. Rachel watched from behind the counter as Tara joked with a poet about swapping dessert recipes, while Sarah thanked Mike for his generosity. Across the room, Evan said goodbye to the group, offering his help for future events. For a fleeting moment, Rachel marveled at the scene. This was the first time in a long while that Little Page Books felt as vibrant as she'd always envisioned. The fear of losing the store lingered. Its finances were still precarious, but something new glowed in the air, hope. And in that hope, Rachel recognized the forming of friendships and alliances that could carry them through whatever challenges might loom. The humility of her gesture in front of a taxi weeks ago had sparked far more than she'd ever dreamed, and now she couldn't help but feel both overwhelmed and grateful for the unexpected blossoming of a community around her. The week of the poetry event arrived in a rush of phone calls, last-minute edits to the program, and a buzzing anticipation around Oak Hill. Social media chatter suggested a decent turnout, and Rachel was both excited and terrified at the thought of the bookstore filling with eager listeners. It was on Wednesday afternoon that Philip Carter made his appearance. Rachel had heard his name before. He was a local investor known for swooping in on struggling businesses, then revamping or reselling them at a profit. She hadn't realized he'd taken interest in Little Page Books until he arrived unannounced, wearing a crisp suit and a pointed smirk. "Good afternoon," he said, scanning the shelves as though assessing them for monetary worth. "I'm Philip Carter. I'd like to speak with the owner." "Is that you, young lady?" Rachel, momentarily thrown off, straightened her back. "No, the owner is Sarah Jones, but I help manage the place. May I ask what this is about?" Philip glanced around with a practiced eye. "I've heard rumors the store's not doing well financially. I might have a proposition that could keep it afloat, assuming you're open to offers." His cool demeanor was off-putting, lacking the warmth she was used to from their regular patrons. Before Rachel could respond, Sarah stepped forward from the back office, having overheard enough to join them. "I'm Sarah Jones," she said, meeting Philip's gaze calmly. "I own Little Page Books. Care to explain this proposition?" Philip wasted no time. "I'm prepared to invest in businesses that show potential, but from what I gather, your monthly numbers are slipping. Let's say I offer to buy the bookstore outright. You can remain as employees or consult for a while. Eventually, I may convert part of it into a cafe or a specialty shop. There's a demand for upscale boutiques in Oak Hill." The suggestion landed like a punch to Rachel's stomach. She watched Sarah's face tighten. "I'm not interested in selling," Sarah said, her voice firm. Philip chuckled lightly. "Most owners aren't, until they see how profitable it can be to accept a takeover. Think about it. No more stress over rent or payroll. You'd walk away with a solid sum, free to move on to something else. Meanwhile, the store location could be reinvented under better funding." The dismissal in his tone ignited Rachel's irritation. "We're doing just fine," she insisted, even though a flicker of doubt pulsed beneath her words. "We have an event this weekend that's drawn a lot of local support. The community cares about this bookstore." Philip raised a brow, unimpressed. "A poetry reading. Cute. But such small events won't keep you solvent long-term." He then turned to Sarah. "Here's my card. If reality sets in and you want to talk real business, let me know." At that moment, Evan walked in, catching the tail end of Philip's remark. He paused, reading the tension in the room. "Everything all right?" he asked calmly. Philip eyed Evan, sizing him up with a dismissive glance. "I'm discussing a potential buyout of the store. We're just about finished here." Evan's gaze darkened slightly. "Buyout, huh? And you think you're just going to walk in and take control of a place that people value?" Philip scoffed. "I don't think anything. I know the numbers. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills." Rachel, fighting the urge to snap back, was relieved when Evan stepped closer, folding his arms. He spoke with careful composure. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. True. But neither does underestimating a business's capacity for revitalization. People have big ideas for this bookstore, and it has potential you clearly don't appreciate." Philip's lips curled into a condescending smile. "And who are you exactly? The boyfriend, a volunteer?" Evan paused, briefly glancing at Rachel. "Just someone who believes in what they're trying to do here. This store might surprise you." Rolling his eyes, Philip turned back to Sarah. "Think about what I said. If you change your mind, you know how to reach me." With that, he pocketed the card he'd extended and strutted out, leaving a tension-laden silence behind. Sarah let out a slow breath, her hands visibly trembling. Rachel instinctively stepped closer, concerned. "Sarah," she began softly, "don't let him get to you. We're on a path to turning things around." Sarah nodded, but the worry on her face was unmistakable. "I knew the bookstore's finances were bad, but I didn't think vultures like him would circle this quickly." Evan gently placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Don't give up. He just wants to profit from your fear. Let's show him we can make this place flourish." Rachel, her heart still pounding, found momentary comfort in the steadiness of Evan's presence. For the first time in a long while, she felt a protective surge, not just toward the bookstore, but toward the sense of community it represented. The confrontation with Philip galvanized her resolve. Yes, the poetry reading might be small, but it was a symbol of hope and creativity, everything that money couldn't buy. And standing in that tension-filled space, she silently vowed to fight for all that Little Page Books could become. The night of the poetry reading arrived with a cloudless sky and a refreshing autumn chill. By 7 o'clock, Little Page Books was alive with the soft buzz of conversation. Folding chairs surrounded a small makeshift stage, and twinkle lights dangled across the shelves, creating a cozy atmosphere for the evening's performances. Rachel stood near the entrance, greeting attendees as they filed in. Some were local artists, others were regular customers excited for something new in their quiet town. She felt both exhilarated and slightly queasy. The store had never hosted an event this large. A few weeks ago, she would have been far too anxious to coordinate all these details, arranging the microphone setup, ensuring fresh pastries from Mike's coffee shop, printing programs that listed the featured poets. Yet here she was, moving with a purposeful stride, directing people to seats and offering warm smiles. At her side, Tara floated about in a whirl of energy, dispensing cups of tea and coffee as if the night depended on her good cheer. About 15 minutes before the event began, Sarah emerged from the back office, carefully balancing a plate of cookies. She caught Rachel's eye and gave an encouraging grin. "It's a full house," Sarah said, nodding toward the growing crowd. "I'm proud of you, Rachel. You've pulled this together beautifully." Rachel's stomach fluttered. "Let's just hope everything goes smoothly," she replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She glanced around, spotting Martha, her dear friend, who'd made a surprise visit from out of town, seated near the stage. Martha waved, flashing a bright, supportive grin. Behind a nearby bookshelf, Evan was discreetly helping one of the poets test the microphone's volume. Even though he remained mostly in the background, Rachel noticed how he checked in with volunteers, offered quiet reassurances, and ensured nothing was overlooked. More than once, She caught herself pausing just to watch him, to appreciate how naturally he stepped into a coordinating role. She still knew little of his life outside these walls, but his willingness to shoulder some of the pressure bolstered her confidence. At exactly 7:30, the overhead lights dimmed and Rachel stood on the small stage, microphone in hand. Her heart thudded against her ribcage, yet she mustered a steady voice. "Good evenings, everyone," she began, eyeing the sea of faces before her. "Welcome to our first Poets' Night at Little Page Books. We're so honored you chose to spend your evening here, supporting local writers and our beloved store. Let's celebrate creativity and community." She introduced the opening poet, stepping off to warm applause. The poet took the stage, reciting verses about autumn leaves, about love found and lost, about the swirl of everyday moments we often overlook. The words wove a hush through the crowd, and Rachel felt her own eyes welling at the gentle honesty of the lines. One by one, the poets each brought their unique flair. Some were humorous, drawing laughter and wide grins. Others were reflective, prompting an almost reverent silence. Halfway through the program, a short intermission allowed folks to mingle, refill their mugs, and browse the bookstore shelves. Rachel watched in awe as customers she'd never met asked for book recommendations, chatted about the poems, and admired the carefully curated titles that lined every aisle. Around this time, a sudden flicker of lights caused a ripple of unease. Rachel's breath caught, a minor power surge, perhaps. She rushed to check the circuit breaker, heart pounding at the thought of a blackout ruining the event. Thankfully, the lights steadied and the microphone still worked. "Crisis averted," Evan whispered, meeting her halfway. With a reassuring nod, he squeezed her shoulder gently, and she realized how much she'd come to rely on that silent vote of confidence. As the evening continued, applause and laughter filled the room, and Rachel glimpsed something she hadn't seen in a while, a bookstore brimming with life and possibility. Even Sarah, who tended to worry, was beaming at the turnout. Near closing, an open mic session welcomed newer voices, and many shared heartfelt poems that captured the spirit of Oak Hill's everyday triumphs and trials. By the time the final reader finished, the store erupted in applause. Rachel stepped forward again, thanking everyone for coming and inviting them to future gatherings. As the audience began to trickle out, many lingered, forming small clusters of conversation. A few folks even purchased books from local authors displayed on a special table. It felt like an unspoken promise that Little Page Books was becoming a lively community hub again. Before the last guest left, Rachel found a quiet moment to stand near the front window, gazing at the reflection of the store's twinkling lights on the dark glass. She smiled to herself, overwhelmed by gratitude. Tonight had tested her capacity to organize, to lead, and to trust in the goodwill of others. In that test, she'd discovered a deeper well of empathy and courage she hadn't realized she possessed. The day after the poetry event, an electric buzz lingered in the air. Customers wandered into the bookstore, some specifically mentioning how much they'd enjoyed the previous night's performances. Sales ticked upward slightly. Local poetry anthologies, memoirs, and even romance novels found their way into new hands. Sarah made a point of restocking the shelves with fresh titles, heartened by the spark of renewed interest. Rachel, though tired, felt an undercurrent of joy propelling her through the day. Each time she recalled a memorable poem from the event or recognized a face that had attended, she felt a surge of pride. Even so, there was something else gnawing at her. She hadn't had a chance to speak candidly with Evan after the event. He'd slipped out once the cleanup began, leaving only a quick note by the register. "You did great. We'll talk soon." On Sunday afternoon, Martha invited Rachel to a small cafe near the bookstore. The two old friends settled into a booth by the window, steam rising from their mugs. After a few pleasantries, Martha fixed Rachel with a knowing gaze. "All right, spill. How are things really going with Evan? I saw the way you two worked together last night. There's a definite connection, but I sense you're holding back." Rachel picked at the rim of her cup, her expression clouding. "He's wonderful when we plan events together," she admitted. "He's calm, resourceful, supportive, just what we need. But I realize I know almost nothing about his personal life. I've tried asking how he learned all these business strategies, and he sidesteps it with vague answers." Martha raised a brow. "Maybe he's just a private person. Doesn't necessarily mean he's hiding something malicious." Rachel sighed. "I get that, but part of me can't shake the feeling that he's waiting for the right moment to reveal something big. It's not like I need his entire life story, but I can't help wondering if I'm opening my heart to someone who isn't being fully honest." After taking a thoughtful sip of coffee, Martha spoke gently. "You told me how well he handled Philip's pushy buyout talk, and how he's basically boosting the store's profile. If he had harmful intentions, he wouldn't be going to all this trouble. Could it be he just wants to be seen for who he is, beyond a title or job?" Rachel's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Maybe. I just don't want to be blindsided again. You know, last time I fell for someone I didn't truly know, it left me in pieces." The memory weighed on her chest, and she instinctively clenched her jaw. Martha reached across the table and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I get it. But you're braver now than you were then. And not everyone is out to hurt you." They lapsed into a quiet moment, the hum of nearby conversations filling the gap. Eventually, Rachel forced a small smile. "You're right. I need to find a way to talk to him." That conversation stayed with Rachel for the rest of the day, swirling in her mind as she helped Sarah place new book orders and answered customer inquiries. By closing time, she was resolved to ask Evan more directly about his background. She hated feeling as though she walked on eggshells whenever his past came up, and the tension it caused in her chest was growing impossible to ignore. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave the store, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. "Have some time tomorrow. I want to run an idea by you." Her heart thumped. Gathering her courage, she replied, "Sure." "Meet at Mike's coffee shop, afternoon," he confirmed swiftly, and Rachel slipped her phone into her coat pocket. In the quiet of the empty bookstore, she felt a flicker of nerves. This was her chance not just to hear his new plan, but to ask the questions that had weighed on her for weeks now. If she truly wanted a future for Little Page books, and possibly a future with Evan, she needed honesty. And while her emotions tangled between hope and anxiety, the lingering sense of conflict within her drove her to seek the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. On Monday afternoon, Rachel slipped into Mike's coffee shop, brushing away the drizzle from her coat. Spotting Evan at a corner table, she felt her heart skip. He was reviewing something on his phone, brows slightly furrowed, and it struck her again how serious and focused he could look. He glanced up, his features softening when he saw her. "Hey," he greeted, standing briefly as she approached. She noticed he was wearing a charcoal grey sweater that highlighted his lean frame. "Grab a seat. Want something to drink?" Rachel nodded. "Maybe a cappuccino, thanks." She took a seat, scanning the shop's warm interior. The faint smell of coffee mingled with freshly baked pastries from the display counter. Despite the cozy setting, her nerves were alight, recalling Martha's reminder, "Sometimes you just have to ask." After ordering, Evan returned to the table. "How have you been since the poetry night? I didn't get a chance to tell you in person. It went amazingly well." "Still riding that high," Rachel replied, allowing herself a small smile. "We had so many people come in the next day talking about it." Evan nodded, his expression brightening. "I'm glad Actually, that's part of what I wanted to discuss with you. I've been thinking about how to build on that momentum, maybe expand the events, bring in local non-profits or community programs to partner with you. Each collaboration could attract new visitors. He set his phone on the table. I made a list of possible groups. Rachel glanced at the screen, impressed by the thoroughness of his suggestions. Her chest tightened, though, as she recalled her personal agenda. She swallowed, then willed herself to speak calmly. Evan, all of this looks great, but before we dive deeper, there's something on my mind I have to address. He tilted his head curiously. Sure. What's up? The cappuccino arrived just then, giving Rachel a moment to collect herself. She stirred the foam, inhaling the comforting aroma. I appreciate everything you're doing, but I don't really know why you're so invested in helping us. And you never talk about your own background. Evan's eyes flickered with something she couldn't read, maybe surprise, maybe wariness. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You're wondering if I have some hidden motive? She hesitated. I wouldn't phrase it quite like that, but yes, I'm worried about how little I know about your life, especially when you've had such an impact on mine, on the stores. It seems fair I at least understand who you are, beyond the advice you offer. For a moment, he was silent. The distant hum of the espresso machine filled the pause. Finally, he exhaled, Rachel, I've told you that I value living simply, experiencing ordinary life. That's partly because my regular life is anything but simple. He looked down at his hands, as though wrestling with the right words. I'm in a position where people often treat me differently once they know the details. I needed a break from that. Her heartbeat quickened. She recalled the expensive watch glimpsed beneath his jacket sleeve once, or the business savvy he consistently displayed. So, are you like some major corporate figure? She ventured, her voice trembling slightly. Evan gave a wry half-smile. It's more than that. I'm the CEO of a sizable company. Let's just say my net worth is substantial, which tends to change how people interact with me. He let out a slow breath. When you paid for my taxi that night, I felt something shift. There I was in this normal situation, but I realized how disconnected I'd become from everyday kindness. You didn't know me, and you helped anyway. Her mind spun. A CEO with a substantial net worth? She grasped her cappuccino cup, searching for a steadying thought. The swirl of emotions, shock, confusion, relief, roiled inside her. Sensing her reaction, Evan continued more quietly. I didn't lie outright, but I avoided telling you because I liked being seen as just Evan, not a guy in an expensive suit with PR reps and endless meetings. I wanted to be around people who valued me without knowing my title or wealth. It was selfish, but that's the truth. Rachel's hands shook slightly. Suddenly, it felt as if her world had tilted. She found herself remembering Philip Carter's dismissive attitude and thinking how differently Evan handled everything. So, everything you've done to help the store, was it just out of guilt for not telling me sooner? Evan's voice turned resolute. No, I truly care about the bookstore and about you, Rachel. It started as me wanting to repay your kindness, but it became something deeper. You matter to me. But before she could fully process his words, the shop door banged open. A breathless Tara appeared, scanning the tables until she spotted them. Rachel! She exclaimed, panting. There's a flood at the bookstore. A pipe burst in the back storage room. Water's everywhere. Rachel shot to her feet, adrenaline surging. She cast one last wide-eyed look at Evan, who clearly recognized the sudden shift from personal revelation to crisis. We'll finish this conversation later, she managed, voice tight with stress. He nodded, already reaching for his coat. Let's go. In a heartbeat, they rushed out into the drizzle, leaving the half-finished cappuccino and a tangle of newly revealed truths behind. Rachel burst through the door of little page books, nearly skidding on the wet floor. Water pooled around her boots, the scent of damp cardboard and soaked paper assaulting her senses. In the storeroom, a broken pipe near the ceiling dripped steadily, forming a small torrent that had seeped under boxes of unsold books and supplies. Tara and Sarah were already there, trying to salvage anything not yet drenched. Mike from the coffee shop had arrived too, hauling in old towels and mops. "I called the plumber," Sarah gasped, wringing out her soaked sleeves. "He's on his way, but it might take an hour." Evan stepped up behind Rachel, quickly surveying the damage. He discarded his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, wading into the puddles. "All right, let's move anything valuable off the floor," he instructed calmly. "And we need to divert water away from the bookshelves. Towels, tarps, anything we can find." Chaos ensued. Rachel, battling against her own shock, worked alongside the others, stacking drenched boxes onto rolling carts. At times, water splashed her ankles, and her jeans soon clung uncomfortably to her legs, yet she kept going, powered by a desperate need to save the precious inventory. While wrestling with a heavy box, Rachel heard Sarah's voice crack with distress. "All those limited editions. We just got them for next month's event." She bent over to inspect a half-soaked box, wincing at the damage. "This is such a blow." Evan crouched beside her, a hand on her shoulder. "We'll do what we can, Sarah," he assured softly. "We can file an insurance claim, see what can be salvaged. It's tough, but we'll manage." It took another hour of backbreaking effort before the plumber arrived, shutting off the main water supply and patching the broken pipe. By then, half the storeroom was flooded, and the dampness threatened to spread into the main shop. But the group's teamwork contained most of the water to that one section. Exhausted and soaked, they collapsed onto crates and chairs to catch their breath. Sarah dabbed her eyes with the back of her hand, looking around at the mess. "We lost quite a bit," she murmured. "Even if we can claim insurance, it won't cover all the costs. And this disruption—" She shook her head, overwhelmed. Rachel sank onto an upside-down bucket, heart pounding with frustration. They had made such progress with the poetry night. Public interest in the store was rising. Now, fate had tossed them yet another obstacle. She glanced at Evan, who sat near the wall with water stains on his shirt, hair disheveled from the scramble. A potent mix of gratitude and confusion washed over her. Gratitude for his unwavering help, confusion about his revelation. Sensing her gaze, Evan offered a tired but reassuring smile. "We'll get through this," he whispered, "one challenge at a time." Mike stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We can host a little fundraiser at my coffee shop," he proposed, looking around at the others. "A percentage of the sales on a weekend could go toward repairs. Lots of people love this bookstore. I'm sure they'd support it." A flicker of hope kindled in Sarah's eyes. "That's kind of you, Mike. It might help offset the costs." She glanced at Rachel. "What do you think?" Despite the fatigue weighing on her limbs, Rachel forced a nod. "Yes, absolutely. I can help coordinate that. Maybe ask local businesses if they'd donate items for a small raffle." She paused, voice cracking with emotion. "We can't give up now. The store means too much to all of us." A ripple of agreement passed through the group. Even Tara, who looked close to tears from the stress, brightened at the idea of pulling together the community once again. Rachel felt a wave of relief. This wasn't an end, it was a setback, and after facing so many struggles, she was learning that every victory was partial, every triumph coming with new responsibilities. Evan slowly rose to his feet. "All right. Well, let's start the cleanup. We can get a jump on drying things out, then figure out how to reorganize the storage area." Though exhaustion tugged at them, everyone mustered fresh energy. Together, they mopped, wiped, and salvaged what was left. Mike headed out to gather industrial fans from a friend's hardware store, promising to return with reinforcements. By the time evening shadows lengthened, the immediate crisis was under control. The pipe was fixed, and the room was no longer flooding. They stood amidst damp boxes and scattered towels, eyes heavy but determination intact. Rachel looked at Sarah, then at Tara, Mike, and finally Evan. Despite the drenched clothes and weary faces, a sense of unity shone in their eyes. They might have lost product and shelving space, but the bookstore still stood, and their resolve remained stronger than ever. Late that evening, after most of the cleanup was done, Rachel locked up little page books and trudged outside, feeling the cool night air wrap around her damp clothes. Evan followed, his own shirt still clinging uncomfortably from the water-soaked storeroom. Overhead, the stars shimmered with a quiet brilliance that made the events of the day feel both monumental and strangely small. They walked a short distance up Elm Street, neither speaking at first. A faint glow from the street lamps lit their path. Finally, Rachel cleared her throat. "Thank you for staying to help," she said softly. "You didn't have to go through all that." Evan gave a weary half-smile. "I wasn't about to leave you guys dealing with that mess alone." He paused, then looked at her with concern. "How are you holding up?" Rachel let out a breath she'd been unconsciously holding. Exhausted, saddened by the damage, but oddly resolute. She swallowed, recalling the wave of relief that washed over her when the water finally stopped. "We've come this far. I'm not letting a burst pipe end us." They reached a bench near a small public garden where they sank down side by side. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and damp earth. For a moment, the only sounds were distant traffic and the hum of a nearby street lamp. At last, Rachel spoke the words hovering on her mind since their conversation at the coffee shop. "Evan," she began, voice quiet but firm, "you told me you're a CEO. That's a pretty big detail to drop while the bookstore was flooding." A soft laugh escaped her, half amused by the absurd timing, half anxious about what came next. "I need to understand more, and I need to know why you didn't tell me earlier." He nodded slowly. "I get it. I never meant for you to find out in such a rushed way." Running a hand through his hair, he pressed on. "I oversee a large corporation. Let's leave it at that for now. I took a personal leave of absence a couple of weeks back, wanting time away from constant meetings, decisions, and the pressures of running a public company. It was supposed to be a short break to clear my head." His eyes searched hers, as if gauging whether she believed him. "I needed to remember what real life felt like, without assistants handing me everything, without people focusing on my bank balance. Then I met you, and your kindness was so genuine. I realized that's what I'd been missing. Authenticity." Rachel listened intently, the city lights reflecting in her brown eyes. Though questions still swirled, she found herself sympathizing with his confession. She knew what it was like to crave simpler, more meaningful connections. "But," he continued, "as I got closer to you, it became harder to confess the truth without worrying you'd feel betrayed or see me differently. I let that fear stop me from opening up. And then today, when I finally tried to tell you, disaster struck at the store." She glanced down at her hands, recalling how stunned she'd felt when he'd first revealed his background. "It's a lot to process," she admitted softly. "I guess I always sensed there was more to your story. Now I know." He took a breath, his voice turning earnest. "All I want is a chance to prove that what I feel for you, what I feel for this bookstore, doesn't rely on business or money. I'd like to help you financially if I can, but not because I doubt your abilities or want to control anything. It's because I care." Rachel's heart panged, torn between the sweet relief of hearing him say those words and the lingering wariness. "I'm scared," she confessed, meeting his gaze. "I've learned the hard way that nothing comes without strings attached, and we're in a vulnerable position right now." He gently placed a hand on hers. "I understand. That's why I'm offering, not imposing. If you prefer I step back and let you handle things, I will. But if you ever need more resources, more connections, whatever might help Little Page Books stay afloat, I'm here. I won't hide who I am anymore. A tear threatened to spill down Rachel's cheek, but she blinked it away. Despite all the turmoil and exhaustion, his words carried a comforting sincerity. She could feel the barrier between them shifting, if not fully dissolving. I just need a little time to sort it all out, she whispered. But thank you for telling me. Really. Evan nodded, and together they sat in silence for a few beats under the night sky. At length, Rachel stood, her body protesting with soreness. We should probably get some rest. Another big day tomorrow. Figuring out repairs, dealing with insurers, and everything else. He rose too, slipping his jacket over her shoulders to shield her from the chill. Let's tackle it one step at a time. And Rachel, no matter what, you're not alone in this. She glanced back at him, a soft smile forming despite her fatigue. I know, she murmured, and as they walked off toward their separate homes, she felt the first flicker of genuine optimism that maybe, just maybe, the truth could bring them closer. 2 days after the pipe burst, Little Page Books remained in disarray. Industrial fans roared in the back room, blowing over soaked floorboards and musty boxes of damaged inventory. The commotion made normal conversation difficult, and a faint smell of damp paper still clung to every corner. Rachel, clad in jeans and an old sweatshirt, spent the morning checking on the drying process with Tara. They carefully lifted books to see if any pages were salvageable, but too many were warped beyond repair. Sarah stood nearby, flipping through insurance paperwork with an air of resignation. I'm afraid the claim might only cover a portion, she said, her voice weighed down by worry. Replacing these damaged titles could run us thousands of dollars, not counting the repairs to the storeroom. A pang hit Rachel's chest, but before she could reply, Evan stepped inside, a somber expression on his face. She hadn't seen him since their late-night talk on the bench. They'd exchanged a few texts, polite updates about the flooding, but nothing more about his identity or her lingering uncertainty. He approached quietly, acknowledging Sarah's furrowed brow with a respectful nod. Good morning, he said. How's it looking? Sarah sighed, gesturing to the fans. Could be worse, but it's still bad. We'll have to rip out part of the drywall to prevent mold, and the cost is going to hurt us. She trailed off, giving Rachel a glance that hinted at her desperation. That was when Philip Carter chose to make his entrance. Dressed in another sharp suit, he strolled through the door as though he owned the place, a haughty smile forming on his lips. Well, well, he drawled, taking in the buzzing fans and stacks of ruined boxes. Looks like the damage is pretty extensive. A frustrated heat crept into Rachel's face. We're handling it, she said curtly. Philip shook his head as if genuinely disappointed. It's a shame, really. A fine local landmark like this, one bad disaster away from closure. Then, pivoting to Sarah, he continued, I brought updated terms for my offer. I'm prepared to purchase the bookstore outright, which would spare you these crippling expenses. Evan's jaw tensed. He stepped forward, voice calm but edged with steel. She told you she's not interested. Have some respect for the situation. Philip narrowed his eyes, turning to size Evan up. And you are... Who's exactly? Evan didn't flinch. He locked eyes with Philip, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. Rachel swallowed, recalling that up to now, Evan hadn't publicly revealed his real position. She sensed that was about to change. I'm Evan Matthews, he stated evenly, and I'm personally invested in helping this store recover. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, one that bore the embossed logo of a well-known corporation. CEO, it read, along with his name in stark lettering. Philip's gaze flicked over the card, recognition stirring in his features. Rachel could practically see the calculations whirring behind Philip's smirk. "Ah, so you're that Evan Matthews," he said slowly. "I've heard rumors, but never expected you in a humble spot like Oak Hill." Sarah and Tara exchanged startled looks. They'd known Evan had some business background, but neither had realized he commanded a corporation of such magnitude. The hush that followed made Rachel's heart pound as she watched Philip's expression shift. "Since you're here, maybe you can explain why a CEO would be messing around with a failing bookstore," Philip pressed, voice dripping with skepticism. "I assume this is some philanthropic whim. Or do you expect to buy it yourself for cheap and swoop in as the savior?" Evan's shoulders squared. "I have no intention of forcing a sale," he replied. "I'm here to offer help on their terms, not to take advantage of anyone." Philip let out a short laugh. "You and I both know how business works, Matthews. Sooner or later, the bottom line wins, and these folks are underwater, literally." He flashed a condescending grin at Sarah, ignoring her obvious distress. "Call me if you change your mind. I'll leave my revised offer on the counter." A heavy silence stretched in the wake of Philip's exit. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the paper he'd left behind. Evan cleared his throat, turning to face the rest of them. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I never meant to let my identity come out this way." Sarah pressed her lips together, looking back and forth between Rachel and Evan. In her eyes, Rachel saw shock, confusion, and a flicker of hope. Despite the tension, the possibility of Evan's resources might be exactly what Little Page Books needed. But it felt like a painfully complicated twist, one that left everyone reeling. And as the roar of the fans continued to echo, Rachel felt the weight of what this revelation meant, not just for the store, but for their fragile bond as well. Word traveled fast in Oak Hill. By midweek, whispers circulated that Evan Matthews, a name usually confined to business journals, was somehow connected to the small-town bookstore. Some speculated he might invest in the shop. Others gossiped that he was running from scandal or testing out a new business model. Within Little Page Books, however, the immediate priority was still the flood damage and the precarious finances. Sarah spent her mornings sorting through waterlogged stock, while Rachel devoted most of her free hours to calling insurance adjusters and comparing repair quotes. Tara juggled the front of the store, trying to maintain normalcy for customers who ventured inside, but the real undercurrent of tension lay in the changes sparked by Evan's abrupt unveiling. "Is this going to be a good thing or a bad thing for us?" Tara asked one afternoon, after a small wave of customers cleared out. She was rearranging a table display of bestsellers with a fretful air. "I mean, we can't pretend we don't need help. But people are talking, Rachel." Rachel rubbed her temples, fatigue etched into the corners of her eyes. "Honestly, I don't know, Tara," she confessed. "Evan keeps offering assistance, but Sarah's pride is hurt. She hates the idea of appearing like we're accepting a bailout from some high-powered CEO." In truth, Rachel felt torn herself. She trusted Evan's intentions more than she once did, but she couldn't deny how complicated it was. The store had always been a community fixture, built on genuine connections and neighborly support. Would letting a wealthy outsider help tarnish that sense of authenticity? She found herself in the back room soon after, scanning the soggy remains of what had once been carefully curated inventory. A pang of regret stabbed at her. All the progress they had made with the poetry night, the fresh wave of interest, it might unravel if they couldn't keep the store open. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Evan. Tucking a damp rag aside, she stepped away from the noise of the fans and answered. "Hi," she said, forcing a calm tone. "Hey," Evan greeted quietly. "I heard talk around town. People are speculating about me, about the bookstore. I wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay." A weary laugh escaped her. As okay as can be, considering repairs are adding up fast, and we haven't even replaced the damaged books. Sarah's trying to see if any partial shipments can be reordered at a discount. But that's only a dent in the total cost. She paused, exhaling. And yeah, folks are buzzing about you. It's an adjustment. He seemed to hesitate. I'm sorry it came out like this, but there's no going back. Let me help, Rachel. I can cover these repairs, no strings attached, if it will keep the bookstore afloat. Her heart clenched. Part of her wanted to accept without hesitation, relief from the crushing burden. Another part clung to the fear of losing independence. Evan, she said slowly, I appreciate the offer, but it's not just my decision. Sarah, she's proud of what she built. I need to respect that. A gentle sigh came from his end. I understand. It's your call, both of you. I don't want to pressure anyone. A pause. Then maybe I can at least pay for the next batch of replacements. Quietly. I'll pretend to be a sponsor or an anonymous donor. Let me do something, please. Rachel leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of it all. Let me talk to Sarah, she conceded. We'll see how she feels about a donation. She might prefer that to a formal investment. They hung up, and Rachel lingered there in the half-lit storeroom, the drone of fans numbing her thoughts. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose. Gratitude for Evan's sincerity, guilt over not wanting to accept his generosity publicly, and a deep worry about how Sarah would cope with the notion of outside funds. That evening, when the store finally closed, Rachel found Sarah shutting down the computer near the register, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Summoning courage, Rachel approached. Sarah, she began, voice quiet. I've been speaking with Evan. He's offering to help us financially in a less formal way, like a discreet donation. We could replace damaged stock and fix up the storeroom without risking all our savings. Sarah turned, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Rachel's stomach twisted in knots. At last, Sarah exhaled, her breath shaky. My heart rebels against it, Rachel. I never wanted to see this place reliant on handouts, but I'm also not blind to our situation. Relief and apprehension mingled in Rachel's chest. So, maybe we consider it, temporarily at least. Rubbing her temple, Sarah nodded reluctantly. Let me think about it tonight. We'll talk in the morning. Rachel smiled gently, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. We'll figure this out, one step at a time. Yet as she turned out the lights and walked into the cool night, she felt the heaviness of choices that might alter the bookstore's fate. Accepting help could save them, but at what cost to their pride and sense of identity? Early the next morning, Oak Hill was bathed in a soft autumn glow, the sun's rays illuminating sidewalks covered in fading orange and gold leaves. Rachel awoke with a sense of determination. She'd spent a restless night wrestling with the question of whether to accept Evan's covert donation. Beneath it all, another realization kept surfacing. She needed to be honest about her growing feelings for him, even if those feelings felt complicated. Once she arrived at Little Page Books, she found Sarah in the storeroom, gingerly picking up a bundle of battered classics. The store owner's shoulders were tense, her eyes reflecting a stubborn defiance that Rachel recognized all too well. It was the look of someone desperate not to lose a fight. "Did you think about it?" Rachel asked softly, setting her purse aside. Sarah sighed, setting the damaged volumes down. "I did. I don't like the idea of letting someone else bail us out, but I dislike the idea of closing the store even more. If we can accept Evan's help quietly, as a friend of the bookstore, maybe that's the compromise." Relief filled Rachel, though tempered by lingering caution. "I'll talk to him. We'll keep it discreet, but it'll give us the boost we need to repair and restock." The morning drifted by in slow waves. Tara managed the front, greeting customers who trickled in for new releases or simply to chat about the recent flood. By midday, Martha dropped by, giving Rachel a warm hug. "I heard about the big reveal with Evan," she teased gently. "You're caught between a rock and a millionaire, I see." Rachel groaned, rolling her eyes with a wry grin. "Something like that. But he's trying to help. And well, I think I'm going to let him for the store's sake." Martha studied her, a knowing glimmer in her gaze. "And for your sake, too. You like him, don't you?" Heat rose to Rachel's cheeks. "Yes," she admitted, quieter than a whisper. "I do. But it's not simple. I can't tell if he's just feeling charitable because of how we met, or if—" Martha placed a comforting hand on Rachel's arm. "Everything about love is messy, sweet friend. But from what I've seen, Evan's not a man who does anything half-heartedly. If he's here, it's because he genuinely cares." Those words stayed with Rachel, echoing in her mind as she scrolled through lists of replacement books that afternoon. She thought about the mentorship Evan had offered, the gentle way he reassured her in stressful moments, and even the quiet heartbreak in his eyes whenever she hesitated to trust him. Little by little, she felt her barriers lowering, replaced by a cautious but real hope. Late in the day, Evan texted, "Any updates on the donation idea? I'm ready whenever you and Sarah are." Rachel texted back, inviting him for a quick meeting at the store after closing. Sarah, though still uneasy, agreed to be present. By evening, the bookstore stood mostly empty. A few dedicated customers lingered, but soon it was just Rachel, Sarah, and Evan in the storeroom, overshadowed by towering fans and the remnants of damp cardboard. Evan wore a thoughtful expression as he surveyed the scene. "Looks like the drying process is working, but the damage is still pretty extensive," he observed. Sarah nodded gravely, arms folded. "We'll need to replace a chunk of stock and fix parts of the floor and drywall. We have some coverage, but the gap is significant." She swallowed, forcing out the next words. "If you truly want to help, I'll accept. On one condition, the store remains ours. No co-ownership, no forcing changes we don't approve." Evan's gaze was steady. "Absolutely. I'm not interested in controlling anything. I just want to see you thrive." He pulled out a small folder, detailing how the funds would be gifted as a personal donation. "It's all laid out here. No formal strings, no hidden clauses." Sarah glanced over the papers, the tension in her posture slowly easing. Then she exhaled, relief flickering across her face. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you, really." Rachel, standing by, felt a flood of gratitude. She caught Evan's eye, and in that silent exchange, she sensed his genuine care. The entire moment felt transformative, as if their acceptance of help signaled not just a financial agreement, but also a deeper emotional shift, an openness to trusting outside support when it mattered most. After finalizing the details, Sarah excused herself to check on tomorrow's deliveries. That left Rachel and Evan alone in the storeroom, the hum of fans droning softly in the background. She cleared her throat, stepping closer. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling with sincerity. "I know this isn't easy for either of us, but it means more than I can say." Evan reached out, lightly brushing a thumb against her cheek in a gesture so gentle that a warm ache bloomed in her chest. "For me," he said quietly, "it's a privilege to help, not a burden." A fragile moment of closeness hovered between them, charged with the promise of something deeper than mere gratitude. And in the dim light of that storeroom, Rachel could almost believe that the hardships, past, present, and future, would somehow be worth it if they faced them together. The following days brought a sense of cautious optimism to Little Page Books. With Evan's discreet donation secured, Sarah ordered the crucial replacements for the water-damaged inventory. Mike, from the coffee shop, set up a small donation jar by his register, explaining to curious patrons that the bookstore had been hit by a flood and could use a little boost. Customers chipped in spare change and small bills, adding a cheerful hum of solidarity to Oak Hill's everyday chatter. Inside the bookstore, fans continued to whir, but the floor was drying nicely, and contractors began patching the damaged wall. Rachel still woke each morning with a flutter of anxiety. What if the new deliveries didn't come in time, or if the insurance payout fell short? But each evening, she ended the day reassured by the steady progress. One evening, after closing hours, she and Evan sat at the reading nook near the front window. A makeshift desk, really just a couple of stacked boxes draped with a cloth, held a laptop and scattered notes detailing upcoming events. Evan sipped a coffee, glancing over a list of marketing strategies they'd compiled. "Your next big event is the small fundraiser with Mike," he said, tapping the screen. "You'll have local musicians, a book signing, maybe a raffle of gift baskets donated by nearby shops. Let's think about how to maximize turnout." Rachel nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We can share it on social media, put up posters, maybe even a small ad in the local paper. We learned from the poetry night that word of mouth is powerful in this town." Evan leaned forward. "And maybe we invite local reporters for a feel-good piece on community collaboration. People like stories of neighbors supporting each other in tough times." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Rachel's face. "Do we risk overshadowing the community aspect if they find out about you? The CEO angle might distract from the store's grassroots vibe." Her voice was tentative, recalling how Philip's intrusion had sparked gossip. He inclined his head in agreement. "We can keep me in the background if you prefer. Let the spotlight be on the bookstore and local folks." "I'm fine with that." She smiled gratefully. The more she saw of Evan's humility, the more she admired him. "All right, let's keep your role minimal. Maybe just mention you as a private donor if someone asks." As they refined the details, a sense of camaraderie filled the small space. Rachel's heart warmed. She realized that not long ago, she felt intimidated by the idea of planning anything beyond simple book clubs. Now she was orchestrating a mini festival of sorts, with different pieces weaving together. Her confidence, nurtured by Evan's guidance, had grown beyond what she'd ever thought possible. Eventually, Evan set his coffee aside. "There's something else I wanted to discuss. You know how we talked about revitalizing the bookstore's identity, not just repairing flood damage? I have some suggestions for updating the interior, maybe better lighting, comfortable seating, even a small cafe corner if you and Sarah are open to it. We could gradually transform Little Page Books into a truly modern community space." Rachel's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "A cafe corner inside the store would be amazing, but it sounds expensive, and I doubt Sarah wants to tear out too many of the classic fixtures." Evan chuckled. "No bulldozers, I promise. We'd keep the bookstore's charm, but I'm offering to foot the bill for some modest renovations, if you think it'll help the store thrive long-term." Chewing her lip, Rachel pictured a bright, welcoming shop where customers could browse shelves, sip coffee, and attend events. The idea was undeniably appealing, but she also felt a twinge of caution. "Let's talk to Sarah first. She needs to be comfortable with any changes to her bookstore." He nodded, expression open. "Of course, it's just an offer, no pressure." They continued brainstorming for another hour, weaving plans for the fundraiser and discussing potential layouts. By the time they called it a night, the hum of excitement in Rachel's chest had grown. She walked Evan to the door, the faint streetlight illuminating the sidewalk beyond. Pausing by the threshold, she glanced up at him. "I never imagined we'd come this far when I first paid that taxi fare," she said, a slight tremor in her laugh. "It's surreal." Evan's gaze was gentle as he rested a hand on the doorframe. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. A hush descended between them. Then, without warning, he leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her temple, a gesture of affection that made her heart lurch with both tenderness and longing. She managed a whispered goodnight, face warm, and watched him vanish into the cool autumn darkness. Long after she locked up, Rachel remained in the reading nook, imagining the bookstore's future. Yes, challenges lay ahead, Philip's looming threat, the store's financial fragility, but for now, hope outweighed fear. And for the first time, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could reconcile her quest for independence with the care and support offered by someone who understood her deeper than she ever expected. Late Friday afternoon, the fundraiser event at Mike's coffee shop bustled with activity. A red and white banner reading "Support Little Page Books" hung above the entrance, and inside, every table was taken by patrons sipping lattes and hot chocolate. Local musicians played gentle acoustic tunes in the corner, while Tara ran a small raffle booth near the pastry display. In the back, Sarah and Rachel greeted neighbors who dropped by to show support, collecting donations that would help offset the bookstore's repair costs. The community response was overwhelming. People who had grown up with Little Page books reminisced about childhood story times, while newcomers marveled at the strong sense of solidarity that seemed woven into Oak Hill's DNA. Rachel felt a lump in her throat every time someone pressed a few bills into the donation jar or purchased an extra pastry, saying, "Keep the change, save that bookstore." Evan arrived discreetly, chatting with Mike about coffee flavors and greeting a few of the locals he'd met at prior events. Whenever Rachel glimpsed him from across the room, a wave of gratitude mixed with an undercurrent of something deeper. His presence was a reminder that none of this revitalization would be happening without his unwavering support. Halfway through the evening, Philip Carter strolled in, looking oddly amused by the scene. He kept his distance at first, sipping a black coffee while observing the lively crowd. But eventually he approached Rachel and Sarah, his expression unreadable. "So, this is how you plan to keep your bookstore afloat? Bake sales and folksy guitar music?" he asked, voice laden with mild sarcasm. "I have to admit, you've drawn quite a crowd." Sarah stood taller, bristling. "We're doing what we can as a community, Mr. Carter. Not every business solution involves selling off to the highest bidder." Philip smirked. "I have no problem with grassroots efforts. I just question if it's enough to sustain your operation long-term. You're patching leaks on a sinking ship." Before Rachel could retort, Evan appeared at her side, calmly meeting Philip's gaze. "The store isn't sinking, it's evolving," he said matter-of-factly. "And if you think they're only relying on small donations, you're mistaken." Philip turned, eyes narrowing. "Ah, yes, the philanthropic CEO, swooping in with a bottomless checkbook. I suppose that's one way to keep a lost cause afloat." Evan's jaw clenched, but his tone remained measured. "Little Page Books isn't a lost cause. It has more heart than any chain store you'd replace it with. I've seen the potential, and I'm committed to helping them realize it. On their terms, not mine." Philip let out a short laugh, then fixed his gaze on Rachel. "Is that what you really want? To tie your bookstore's fate to some benefactor who can withdraw support at any whim?" His words dripped with doubt. "You'd be wise to secure a more stable future, one that doesn't depend on the fancy of a single man." A hush fell around them, the background music suddenly seeming too soft for the tension. Rachel felt the eyes of a few nearby onlookers flicking between her, Evan and Philip, her pulse hammered in her ears. Philip's challenge sliced into the very heart of her dilemma: independence versus accepting help from someone she was starting to trust. and perhaps love. She drew a steadying breath, recalling the nights she and Evan had spent planning, the ways he'd lifted her spirits and offered kindness without demanding control. She glanced at Sarah, who offered a small, encouraging nod. Then, eyes burning with resolve, she turned to Philip. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice carrying the firmness she'd rarely shown in public, "my bookstore is not for sale. If you think a flood and tight finances have scared us into abandoning our dream, you're wrong. Evan's support isn't a crutch. It's a partnership, and we'll run Little Page Books according to our values, with or without your approval." A moment of silence stretched, broken only by the soft guitar chords. Philip studied her, something almost like respect flickering in his gaze, though quickly replaced by disdain. "Suit yourself," he said, shrugging, "but don't come crying to me when reality sets in." With that, he turned on his heel and made for the door. The tension lingered, but as Rachel met Evan's eyes, an odd mixture of relief and triumph coursed through her veins. Around them, the coffee shop crowd resumed chatting, apparently deciding that drama was over. Sarah squeezed Rachel's hand, expression proud, and a wave of applause rose from a few supportive bystanders who'd overheard the exchange. Evan leaned closer, his voice quiet. "That took courage," he murmured, placing a gentle hand on her back. "I'm proud of you." She exhaled, feeling a tear threaten to spill from sheer relief. "I guess that was the big decision I needed to make," she whispered. "And I'm sticking by it." Though problems still remained, insurance negotiations, store repairs, and the delicate process of forging a stable future, Rachel felt as though a cornerstone had been laid. She was no longer standing in the shadows of doubt, uncertain if she could handle the weight of this dream. She'd chosen to defend the bookstore's identity with conviction, to trust in the community's power, and to embrace the partnership Evan offered. And as the fundraiser pressed on, hope shimmered in her chest like a promise of brighter chapters yet to be written. 2 weeks after the big fundraiser at Mike's coffee shop, an air of renewal and cautious triumph lingered around Little Page Books. Contractors had finished patching up the storeroom's drywall, freshly painted in a soft cream color that brightened the once dreary space. Sarah had even agreed to replace a few outdated ceiling fixtures in the main area, allowing the light to fall more warmly on the aisles of books. The steady hum of customers had returned, some just curious to see how the store was faring post-flood, others genuinely excited by the evolving selection of events. Rachel, now wearing a badge labeled manager, juggled her tasks with newfound confidence. As part of her expanded role, she oversaw inventory orders, worked closely with Tara to set up new displays, and collaborated with local clubs that wanted to host small gatherings in the bookstore. On a crisp morning, she stood near a table of new releases, adjusting a small stack of books about personal growth and transformation. It felt symbolic, in a way. Her life had become a reflection of those themes. She noticed a customer leafing through a local author's novel and stepped over to offer assistance. These interactions brought her genuine pleasure, reminding her of why she'd fallen in love with books in the first place. Shortly after noon, Sarah found her. "The plumber came back for a final inspection," the older woman announced, relief filling her voice. "He said all the pipes look good now. We can officially stop worrying about hidden leaks." Rachel let out a grateful laugh. "That's fantastic. One less thing to keep me awake at night." She paused, studying Sarah's face. She recognized the mix of weariness and pride there. "How are you holding up with all the changes?" Sarah gave a pensive nod. "Better than I expected. Letting go of certain habits hasn't been easy. But I see the difference it's making. Younger folks are wandering in, and even long-time patrons say the store feels more welcoming. I suppose change can be good if we don't lose our essence." "Exactly," Rachel agreed. We're not trying to become something else entirely. We're just evolving to survive." In that moment, the front door chimed, and Evan walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Sarah with a polite smile, then handed the other to Rachel. His eyes sparkled with quiet happiness whenever they rested on her. "Thought you two might need a midday boost," he said. "You've been working non-stop." "Perfect timing," Rachel replied, grateful for the warmth of the cup in her hands. She took a sip, savoring the rich roast. "What brings you by so early?" He shrugged. "I wanted to check on the final repairs, make sure you have everything you need," he added more softly, "and to see how you're doing." Sarah, catching the look they exchanged, excused herself tactfully to the back, muttering something about restocking. The moment she left, Rachel felt the slight tension of being alone with Evan in front of the customers, who, these days, often cast curious glances their way, aware of his role in saving the store. "How about we talk outside for a minute?" Rachel suggested, tilting her head toward the door. Stepping onto the sidewalk, they found a spot beside a planter brimming with fall mums. The sky hung bright and clear, and a gentle breeze carried a hint of approaching winter. Evan took in the view of Oak Hill's main street, where brick facades displayed seasonal decor. "I see your flyers for the next poetry night are everywhere," he remarked. "I even spotted one in the City Park kiosk." She smiled, remembering how distributing those flyers had once felt daunting. "We're planning more author signings too," she explained. Sarah agreed to a small children's section expansion, and Mike's coffee shop is now offering a book blend named after Little Page books. "It's pretty exciting." Evan's lips curved into a proud grin. "It's incredible how much can change in just a few weeks." "You've done so much, Rachel." A swell of gratitude filled her chest. "We did so much," she corrected gently. "Without your help, we might have shut down before we had a chance to rebuild." She exhaled, thinking of the swirling rumors that had followed his revelation. Some naysayers still believed he'd buy out the bookstore eventually. But he'd proven his sincerity by stepping back and letting Sarah and Rachel make every major decision. They strolled a short distance to admire a new mural painted on a side wall, something the city council had commissioned to brighten up the shopping district. The colorful design depicted scenes of small-town life, families, trees in bloom, the local diner, and a stack of books that looked suspiciously like those found on a Little Page book's shelf. The sight made Rachel's heart swell. "This place feels more like home than ever," she murmured. She glanced at Evan, recalling how initially she couldn't fathom what a wealthy CEO would want in a simple town like Oak Hill. Now she understood. The peace, the realness, the human connections he'd been craving. "Thank you for deciding to stay, at least for a while." His gaze softened. "I've never been happier." He toyed with the coffee cup's lid. "I'm due back at my company soon, though. The board wants me to check in personally. I need to figure out a balance between my responsibilities there and the life I've built here." A pang of concern streaked through Rachel. She hadn't fully considered the reality of his leaving, or how that might affect their relationship. "We'll figure it out," she said softly, trying to mask the sudden rush of anxiety. "But let's take it one day at a time." He nodded, a warm understanding passing between them. Right now, Little Page Books was standing on firmer ground. The community was rallying, and Rachel felt more confident than she'd ever imagined possible. The future might contain new challenges, both personal and professional, but in that bright autumn sunlight, she chose to believe that what they'd built together could outlast any storm. And for the first time, the horizon stretching before her felt not just daunting, but genuinely hopeful. 2 Saturdays later, the bookstore buzzed with a spirited crowd gathered for a new event, an afternoon panel of local women sharing their life stories in short, inspirational talks. The idea had been Martha's before she left town again. Why not turn the store into a space where voices can echo, where life lessons resonate, she had suggested. Sarah and Rachel loved it. Now 5 women, ranging from mid-40s to late 60s, sat in a semicircle at the front of the store, narrating glimpses of their journeys, starting a home-based business after retirement, finding new love in their 50s, battling health setbacks and emerging stronger. Rachel noticed the audience's rapt attention, especially the older patrons who saw their own hopes and fears reflected in each speaker. In a corner, Evan observed quietly, listening with an intensity that made Rachel's heart glow. She recalled how initially she'd feared his presence might overshadow such intimate community moments. Instead, he blended in like any other attendee, occasionally snapping a discreet photo for the store's social media. When the talks ended, applause filled the room. Tables had been set up with homemade baked goods from local volunteers, apple pies, pumpkin muffins, and pecan brownies, adding to the welcoming atmosphere. Several attendees lingered, chatting with the speakers and exchanging contact information. A handful of people gravitated toward a donation jar, leaving small bills to support future gatherings. Rachel moved through the crowd, making sure everyone felt appreciated, occasionally wiping away a tear as she overheard poignant stories of reinvention and resilience. One woman confided in Rachel that she'd been afraid to retire, worried she'd lose her purpose. Another admitted she'd felt stuck in a stagnant marriage until she found a writing group at the bookstore. As Rachel greeted an older lady who tottered up to her with a cane, she noticed Evan approaching. He paused to let Rachel finish the conversation before gently placing a hand on her arm. "This is amazing," he whispered. "So many heartfelt connections happening in one place." She beamed. "That's exactly what we hoped for. The store has always been a place for stories, but not just the ones written in books." Nearby, Tara collected dirty cups and plates, humming a cheerful tune. Rachel felt a surge of gratitude. Her small team was blossoming alongside the store. Even Sarah, who typically fussed over finances, stood in the back with a contented smile, greeting friends who'd come specifically to support the event. Eventually, the speakers and most of the crowd headed out, some promising to return for future panels or book clubs. The sun began to set, painting the windows in warm hues. Rachel and Evan found themselves by one of the reading tables, tidying stacks of chairs. A comfortable silence hung between them. She glanced at him. "You must think this is quaint compared to your corporate world, our little gatherings with homemade pies and donation jars," she teased lightly. He shook his head, sincerity lighting his features. "Not at all. This is real. People caring about each other, sharing wisdom, growing together. It's something money can't fabricate." A wave of warmth flowed through Rachel's chest. "That means a lot, coming from you." Evan smiled. Then his expression turned reflective. "I've been talking to my board of directors, trying to work out a way to split my time so I can be in Oak Hill more regularly. If I can manage remote work arrangements, I won't have to disappear for months on end." Rachel's heart leapt at the thought. She'd half expected him to be recalled full-time, leaving her behind with a sense of longing. "That's wonderful news," she murmured, placing a folding chair against the wall. "But are you sure it's feasible?" A small laugh escaped him. "We'll see. I might need to compromise on some responsibilities, but I don't want to let this place go. Or you." He paused, searching her eyes. "If you'll have me around, that is." Emotion welled in her throat. The bookstore, the community events, and her bond with Evan, all of it was so different from the quiet life she'd once deemed sufficient. "I'm not letting you vanish," she managed with a trembling smile. "We'll figure it out together." He leaned closer, brushing a soft kiss against her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. In that quiet moment, Echoes of the day's inspirational talks swirled in Rachel's mind. Women confronting fear, redefining dreams, reaching out for love. She felt it all resonating in her own journey, this courageous step of opening her heart to a man who lived a life so different from hers. Yet here they stood, in a humble bookstore that had become something of a second home, wrapped in an embrace of words, hope, and gentle determination to keep forging a path forward. Over the ensuing weeks, life at Little Page Books fell into a new rhythm. With a more stable financial footing, thanks to the insurance payout, community fundraisers, and Evan's discreet donation, Sarah finally felt comfortable letting Rachel and Tara experiment with fresh ideas. A small children's reading nook took shape in a previously underused corner, complete with colourful beanbags and whimsical wall decals. The store's transformation was subtle but impactful: better lighting, improved seating, and a new fragrance of coffee wafting through the air from a small self-serve kiosk near the entrance. It was far from a fully fledged cafe, but customers appreciated the warm, welcoming vibe. Occasionally, locals would comment on how cozy the place felt now, and every time Rachel overheard such praise, her heart fluttered with pride. One grey afternoon, Martha returned for a short visit. She stepped into the bookstore carrying a duffel bag and a broad grin. "Look at this place," she exclaimed, hugging Rachel tightly. "It's so vibrant. I love the changes." Rachel beamed. "You should have seen it a month ago, Martha. Pipes bursting, inventory ruined. We barely held it together." Martha gestured at the children's nook with delight. "You're turning it into a real community haven. This is exactly what you always wanted. Somewhere people can learn, connect, maybe even heal a bit." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude. "Yes," she agreed. "It's become more than a job. It's part of who I am." Later, Rachel and Martha retreated to the small office in the back, sharing takeout sandwiches. Rachel filled her friend in on Evan's plan to manage his corporate duties partly in Oak Hill, how his presence had become a steady reassurance rather than the mystery that once unsettled her. Martha's eyes sparkled with interest. "So, it's serious, huh? You two make quite the team." Rachel set down her half-eaten sandwich, cheeks warming. "It feels that way," she admitted. "There's still a lot we haven't figured out. He'll need to travel sometimes, and I'm here. But whenever he's around, it feels natural. We support each other, not just in words, but in real effort. It's like we bring out the best in each other." Martha reached across the desk and squeezed Rachel's hand. That's the kind of partnership everyone dreams of. Toward evening, with customers tapering off, Rachel showed Martha around the newly revamped storeroom. Boxes of fresh stock were stacked neatly, replacing the damaged books, and Sarah's old desk had been upgraded. Where waterlogged chaos once reigned, order and possibility now thrived. It was in that quiet space that Evan found them, pausing in the doorway. "Hey," he greeted, a friendly smile playing on his lips. "Am I interrupting?" Rachel waved him in. "Not at all. Evan, you remember Martha, right?" He nodded, offering her a warm handshake. "Good to see you again." "Sorry we didn't get to talk much last time you were in town." Martha patted his arm playfully. "I appreciate what you've done for this place, and for Rachel. She's glowing with self-assurance these days." Evan laughed lightly, a faint blush creeping onto his cheeks. "She's the one who's brought the store back to life. I just cheered from the sidelines." They shared a few pleasant moments, discussing the store's new look, and Martha soon excused herself to let them talk privately. Before she left, she shot Rachel an encouraging wink. Alone with Evan in the storeroom, Rachel felt the hum of the overhead light and the warmth of his presence. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a folded paper. "I wanted to show you something," he said. "It's a draft schedule." I've arranged for my next corporate review in person next week, but then I'll be back in Oak Hill for a month straight. After that, 2 weeks away, then another month here. It's an alternating pattern I'm testing out with the board." Her gaze swept over the schedule. Each line represented a block of time, dates in the city, dates in Oak Hill. A tangle of excitement and nerves coiled in her stomach. "It's quite a balancing act," she remarked. He nodded, exhaling. "I know, it won't be perfect, but if you're willing to see how it goes, I'd like to make Oak Hill my part-time home." Gently, he tipped her chin upward so their eyes met. "I'd like to keep building something real with you, Rachel." Emotion rose in her chest, tears burning at the edge of her vision. A month ago, she'd never have believed she could share her life with someone so different from her, a successful CEO, used to penthouses and high-stakes deals. Yet in the low hum of that storeroom, love and respect bridged all those divides. "I want that too," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "We'll find our way through it." In that moment, the humble storeroom seemed to glow with the fulfillment of a dream, the culmination of small acts of kindness, a shared commitment to a beloved bookstore, and the blossoming of a bond neither had expected. Rachel realized she was part of something bigger now, a legacy of compassion and hope that stretched beyond the shelves of little page books, touching hearts in ways she might never fully grasp. On a crisp Sunday morning, the store was closed for a special staff meeting, followed by a casual brunch. Sarah had invited Mike, Tara, and a few of the local volunteers to discuss future plans. Rachel arrived early, admiring the sunlight filtering through the front windows, illuminating fresh book displays and the cozy seating area. The faint aroma of brewed coffee greeted her from the new self-serve station. Slowly, the group gathered. Tara hustled in with a tray of pastries from Mike's shop. Mike himself clutching 2 thermoses of freshly ground beans, and Sarah carrying notepads for brainstorming ideas. Even Martha, who extended her stay by a few days, took a seat, clearly eager to see what was next for Little Page Books. Evan slipped in last, offering a polite wave and a gentle smile for Rachel. They circled around the largest reading table, mugs and plates in hand. Sarah looked at the notepads, but then set them down, smiling at everyone. "Before we talk about business," she said, "I want to say thank you. The bookstore was on the brink, and now, just look at us." Her voice trembled slightly. "We've not only survived a flood, but ended up stronger, all because we came together." A soft applause rippled around the table, and Rachel felt tears threatening as she glanced at the familiar faces. Each person here had played a role, from Mike's generous donations of coffee and pastries to Martha's spark of bold ideas. Tara's tireless enthusiasm had brightened the toughest days, and Sarah's steadfast love for her bookstore had kept them from giving in. And then there was Evan. His steady hand and open heart had carried them more than he might ever realize. Sarah cleared her throat, composing herself. "We've come up with so many new ideas, children's readings, partnerships with local authors and artists. If anyone else wants to propose something, let's hear it." Tara piped up first, suggesting a regular book swap Sunday, where patrons could trade gently used novels. Mike mentioned offering a bigger discount on his pastries during signings so visitors could linger longer. Martha grinned, throwing in an idea about a women's memoir circle, reminding everyone of the success of the recent speaker panel. At last, Evan chimed in, glancing at Rachel as he spoke. "I have a few ideas on how the store can expand digital outreach, maybe an online book club for people who can't come in person. But I'll let you lead the charge, Rachel. It's your show." A flush of warmth spread across her cheeks. She managed a smile that radiated gratitude and pride all at once. "Thank you. That sounds fantastic. After the meeting, they shared a laid-back brunch right there in the reading area, laughing over small-town gossip and reminiscing about the wild ups and downs of the past few months. Eventually, people trickled out for Sunday errands, leaving Rachel and Evan to gather the empty plates and leftover pastries. Tucking away the napkins, Rachel glanced at the store's entrance, remembering the very day she'd first seen Evan, standing unsure beside a taxi driver he couldn't pay. She had no clue how that small kindness would catapult her life into a whirlwind of hope, fear, transformation, and love. Sensing her reflection, Evan came over, setting down a stack of plates. "Penny for your thoughts?" he teased gently. She gave a wistful laugh, leaning against the counter. "I was just thinking about the day we met, how it all started with a taxi fare, such a simple gesture, yet it changed everything." Evan's eyes softened and he reached for her hand. "You have no idea how much you changed my life," he murmured, his voice quieter than the afternoon hush. "I was searching for something real, something meaningful. You gave me exactly that." They stood there, the store silent around them except for the distant hum of the new refrigerator unit holding bottled water and sodas. Through the window, passers-by admired the bookstore sign, freshly repainted, its letters gleaming in the sunlight. "You know," Rachel mused, "I used to think my life was meant to be small. I never dared to hope for more than a quiet job in the background. But now I see how one act of kindness can open doors you didn't even know existed." Evan nodded, drawing her closer. "And sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments." His gaze held hers in a gentle embrace. "I'm glad we both took a chance that day." A rush of emotion welled up, gratitude, joy, and the sweet ache of a future unfolding before them. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, and she let out a shaky laugh, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. "Me too," she whispered. So glad." In that tender stillness, Rachel felt the fullness of the journey, from a shy bookstore assistant who believed in only the safest paths, to a confident manager and partner in a blossoming business, from a lonely CEO who yearned to reconnect with authentic life, to a man willing to share his resources and his heart. Together, they'd forged something stronger than any flood or financial woe could wash away. Pulling back just enough to look at him, she smiled through tears. "Everything feels right," she said, her voice catching. "You and me, this bookstore, the people who've come to care so much. It all began with that one moment of empathy." He brushed a soft kiss across her cheek. "And it's just the beginning." Outside, the sun rose higher, bathing the bookstore in warm light. Inside, amid the shelves of novels and the lingering scent of fresh pastries, Rachel White and Evan Matthews stood arm in arm, hearts brimming with the promise of a new chapter, a future that hinted at greater joy, deeper love, and a shared conviction that every precious moment of kindness holds the power to rewrite destinies. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.